Under the buzzing fluorescence of Terminal B at JFK International Airport, a woman in a charcoal trench coat wheeled her modest carry-on bag past the sleek check-in counters. Her name was Evelyn Trammell. To most passers-by, she looked like any other traveler, calm, composed, and careful with every step. But Evelyn wasn't just another face in the crowd. No one at the airport knew what she really did for a living. Not the passengers, not the TSA agents, not even the airline staff, and certainly not the young customs officer who locked eyes with her that morning. It was a crisp Monday, with the kind of quiet tension that hangs in the air before a storm. Evelyn had just returned from a short conference in Atlanta. The morning crowd was dense, packed with sleepy business travelers, jittery families on vacation, and harried flight crews rushing through security protocols. But Evelyn, she was different. Still, difference, especially when wrapped in dark skin and quiet confidence, has a way of drawing the wrong kind of attention. "Ma'am, step aside." The voice came from behind her, abrupt, impatient. She turned. A young customs officer badge glinting beneath the fluorescent lights pointed at her bag, lips already pursed in suspicion. "I need to inspect your luggage. Secondary screening." She blinked. Is there a reason her voice was even controlled? He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned to the side area curtly. Passengers around her slowed, eyes darting curiously. The woman in the pink sweater behind her gave an audible tusk and whispered something to the man beside her. Evelyn caught the word "random," laced with sarcasm. It wasn't random. She knew that. And deep down, so did everyone else. Inside the screening zone, the officer, his name tag read, Reynolds, unzipped her bag with theatrical flair, like peeling back the curtain on a criminal secret. Evelyn stood still, hands clasped in front of her, watching. "What do you do for a living?" he asked, rummaging through her neatly packed clothes, his tone more interrogative than inquisitive. "I work in federal compliance," she said simply. He scoffed under his breath. "Bet you're in HR or something." Evelyn said nothing. She had learned long ago that dignity was sometimes best preserved in silence. But inside, she took note not just of his tone, but of the way his eyes flickered with something more than skepticism. Contempt, as he examined a toiletry bag, pulling out an unopened bottle of lotion like it was a ticking bomb. Another agent walked by, paused, and narrowed her eyes at Evelyn. "Everything okay here?" the woman asked Reynolds. She flagged on the scanner. He replied, not quite looking at her. "No, I didn't," Evelyn said gently, but clearly. "You pulled me before I reached the scanner." Reynolds didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out her book, a worn copy of The Color of Law, and gave a mocking smirk. "Heavy reading, huh?" Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly. Not because of the comment, but because of what it represented: the casual dismissiveness, the power play, the subtle game of humiliation. "Am I free to go?" she asked. "Not yet. I need to swab your laptop for explosive residue." She watched him fumble with the swab kit, clearly unsure of the steps, and she could have corrected him. Could have told him he was using the wrong end of the cloth. Could have reminded him of protocol numbers 504C and 511A. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she waited, watching, calculating. He wiped the device, scanned it, frowned at the screen. "It's inconclusive. I'm going to need to detain you briefly." The words hit the room like a cold gust of wind. "I don't think that's necessary," came a voice from the back of the security area. Everyone turned. A tall, silver-haired man in a navy blue suit stepped forward. His ID badge hung from his lanyard, marked with a distinct golden border. Reynolds straightened. "Sir, this woman, I know who she is," the man said calmly. That's Inspector Evelyn Trammell. She's with the Office of Federal Inspection Oversight. She's been auditing port of entry conduct nationwide. Silence. Evelyn stepped forward slightly, her tone still calm, but this time layered with unmistakable authority. And I was assigned here 3 days ago, conducting a covert observation of profiling patterns. Reynolds' face drained of color. The room shifted. Eyes widened. The female agent from earlier blinked, suddenly looking anywhere but Evelyn's face. I wasn't aware, Reynolds stammered. You weren't supposed to be, Evelyn replied, but I was hoping I'd see professionalism. Instead, I saw an assumption based on what Officer Reynolds. He didn't answer. I'll be filing a report today, she continued. Along with recommendations for bias mitigation training, for starters, the tall man gave a slow nod. I'll accompany you to the briefing room. Inspector, as Evelyn wheeled her bag out of the inspection zone, passengers who had been watching murmured among themselves. The woman in the pink sweater looked stunned. One man clapped once, quiet but deliberate. Outside, as she moved past the terminal gates, Evelyn allowed herself one deep breath. The kind of breath that comes when you've reclaimed something silently stolen. She didn't look back, because for women like her, forward was the only direction that ever made sense. Inside the briefing room on the second floor, the air was thicker than downstairs, not with tension, but with the weight of what was about to unfold. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, her bag still neatly zipped by her side. The man who had spoken up downstairs, Director Halden from the Port Compliance Division, sat across from her, expression unreadable. A few other officials began to file in: TSA supervisors, port training officers, and a representative from Homeland Security whose eyes rarely left his tablet. Reynolds was not among them. Evelyn placed a small flash drive on the table. This contains all the documentation from my audit over the past 72 hours, video footage, time-stamped logs of interactions, and a compiled report on what I observed. Halden raised an eyebrow. That quickly. I've been compiling it live, she replied. Matter of fact, I wanted to see if the patterns I'd tracked at the other 4 airports repeated here. And unfortunately, they did. There was a pause. The room collectively inhaling. She didn't let them sit too long with their assumptions. With a single click on her laptop, Evelyn projected a series of images on the wall, side-by-side photos of passengers being pulled for secondary inspection. She began to speak not with rage, but with razor-sharp clarity. Over 3 days, 17 out of 22 passengers flagged for secondary screening were people of color. 10 of them were black women. None of them triggered the scanner. All were pulled based on random selection. Yet the random function of the scanner hadn't been used once. Someone shifted in their seat. A cough broke the silence. Halden leaned forward, studying the data. Who authorized manual overrides? That's what I came to find out, Evelyn replied. But more importantly, who benefited from not questioning them? She clicked to another slide video footage from earlier that morning. Reynolds' face appeared, frozen mid-glare, as he gestured at Evelyn's bag. There was no audio, but the body language was unmistakable. The sneer, the disregard. I want to be very clear. Evelyn said, this is not about humiliating one agent. It's about the culture that taught him he could get away with it. The Homeland Security rep looked up now. And you're saying that's systemic. I'm not saying, Evelyn corrected gently. I'm showing. Her fingers danced across the keys again. She brought up a logbook, the internal record of secondary screenings over the past 6 months. Patterns emerged like bruises under blacklight. Evelyn traced them with her voice. This is what institutional bias looks like when it's hiding in plain sight. Not in slurs, not in violence, but in everyday discretion, in silence, in who we choose to question, and who we don't. She let that sit. Then she closed the laptop. "I've completed my audit," she said. "But this report will go to the Joint Committee for Civil Oversight. If no internal training overhaul is implemented within the next 60 days, I'll recommend full federal review and public accountability." Halden looked older than he had moments before. "And what about Reynolds?" someone asked softly. Evelyn glanced out the window. Down below, the terminal bustled on, clueless, indifferent. "Alive, he'll face disciplinary action," she said. But again, this isn't about one man. It's about everyone who saw something and said nothing. There was nothing else to say. She picked up her bag, but before leaving the room, she paused. And one more thing, the room froze. When someone tells you their job is in federal compliance, listen more carefully, because you might be the one being watched. As she exited the room, the halls felt strangely quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Outside, Evelyn didn't rush. She walked the long hallway toward the exit calmly, her heels echoing against the polished floor. People passed her without second glance now, but behind her, a storm had begun to stir, one made not of wind, but consequence. She didn't need applause, she didn't need recognition, she just needed change, and she had already started it. By the time Evelyn stepped out into the open air of the pickup zone, the early afternoon sun had broken through the gray ceiling of clouds. A breeze tugged at the hem of her coat as she paused beside a steel bench, scanning the curb. Her ride hadn't arrived yet. She took a seat, exhaled slowly, and for the first time that day, allowed her shoulders to relax. Around her, life pulsed forward as if nothing had happened. Taxis honked. Porters wheeled luggage across cracks in the sidewalk. A little boy dropped his juice box and burst into tears while his mother offered frazzled comfort. And Evelyn sat in the middle of it all, invisible again, but this time, by choice. It was always like this, quiet afterward, the kind of quiet only those who had walked through fire could recognize. Her phone vibrated. A message from her assistant. "Natalie, heard what happened. Full support from legal, want me to loop in the press." Evelyn stared at the text for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She typed, then deleted, typed again. Finally, she sent, "Not yet. Let the report speak first." She wasn't interested in headlines. Not yet, because too often. The fire burned too quickly. Outrage sparked, went viral, and fizzled before anything actually changed. Evelyn wasn't here to trend. She was here to reconstruct the foundations, quietly, permanently. As she tucked her phone away, a figure approached an older woman in a TSA uniform, her face lined with age and years of biting her tongue. "Inspector Trammell." Evelyn nodded. The woman hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you." Evelyn looked up. "I saw what happened," the woman said, "and what you said in the debrief. You didn't yell, you didn't insult him, but you told the truth. And not everyone has the courage to do that while still keeping their dignity." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Thank you for saying so." The woman lowered her voice. "We've needed someone like you here for a long time." Evelyn didn't reply. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper, handing it to her discreetly. "Anonymous testimony link," she said, "secure and protected, if you ever need it." The woman accepted it like a secret blessing. Her eyes glistened with something between relief and grief. Grief for the years she'd kept her mouth shut, and relief that maybe, finally, someone had cracked the ceiling just enough for light to shine through. Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Moments later, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. "Ms. Trammell," the driver asked. She stood, brushing invisible dust from her lapel. Yes, the car door opened, and she slid into the back seat. As the vehicle merged into traffic, Evelyn leaned her head against the glass, watching the terminal shrink behind her. That building would keep going. The lines, the screens, the agents, the whispers. But now, one story, one carefully placed report, one moment of stillness in the face of humiliation had begun to ripple outward, and she'd be watching, because that's what Evelyn Trammell did, quietly, relentlessly. She watched, not for punishment, but for accountability, not for headlines, but for history. The car took a left onto the freeway, and Evelyn, silent but steady, disappeared into the city. Back at the airport, however, the ripple effect had already begun faster and deeper than anyone had expected. Reynolds had been summoned to an internal review by the afternoon. The moment he walked into the administrative office, the air felt different, colder, sharper. No jokes from the receptionist, no nods from fellow officers, just eyes that looked but didn't linger. He sat down in front of a panel of supervisors, most of whom now held thick folders in their hands, copies of Evelyn Trammell's report, printed in full, marked in red, yellow, and green tabs. "You've been with us for how long?" one of them asked without lifting his eyes. 17 months, sir. And during that time, were you ever trained in bias mitigation or discretionary screening protocol? Yes, but we were told to trust our instincts. Instincts, the supervisor echoed dryly, flipping to a page marked Incident Number 47. So tell me, what was your instinct telling you when you pulled a federally cleared inspector for a non-random secondary screening before she even reached the scanner? Reynolds swallowed. She looked nervous. The silence that followed was suffocating. She was reading a book, another panelist said, holding up a still frame from the CCTV feed, The Color of Law. You described her as suspicious. In what world does a black woman reading a legal history book become a threat? Reynolds stammered. It's not just that. You referred to her as one of those quiet ones in your radio notes. Someone else cut in. What exactly did you mean by that? I didn't mean anything, but that's the problem, isn't it? The supervisor finally looked up. You didn't mean anything. You didn't think it would be remembered, or seen, or reported. The tone shifted then. No longer just an inquiry. It had become a reckoning. You're being suspended pending further investigation, effective immediately. Reynolds opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And just like that, the meeting was over. Outside the office, he sank onto a bench, suddenly aware of how quiet the world had gotten. No texts, no jokes, just the cold metallic sting of a badge he could no longer wear, and a truth he'd refused to see now staring him square in the face. Across the city, Evelyn was in a very different kind of meeting. She sat in a modest, window-lit boardroom with members of the Civil Oversight Council. There were no suits or showy titles here, just community leaders, legal experts, and policy enforcers. And every one of them had read her report. An elderly black woman, hair in a neat bun, leaned forward with careful intensity. "I've been reading these reports for 30 years, she said. But yours feels different. Not just facts, it breathes, it stings, and it teaches." Evelyn gave a small nod. "It's meant to. We can't dismantle what we pretend not to see." They spoke for hours about transparency dashboards, about retraining, about embedding anonymous testimony portals in airport kiosks, even about involving flight crew in proactive bias monitoring. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was real. By evening, Evelyn walked out of the building into a dusky gold sky, exhausted but affirmed. This wasn't about one victory. It was about persistence, pressure, precision. She had seen systems crumble under less. Her phone buzzed again. A message, this time from Natalie. Multiple airports requesting reviews. Your name's going around, quiet hero style. Evelyn smiled to herself. She typed back, let them request. The work continues. But it wasn't until the next morning that she saw what truly changed. As she walked through a different terminal, luggage in tow, a young black girl, maybe 16, sat alone, sketching in a notebook. She looked up as Evelyn passed and gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Not of recognition, but of connection. And Evelyn, without breaking stride, nodded back, because for every Reynolds, there was someone watching, someone learning, someone about to walk into their first confrontation with quiet injustice, unsure of what to do. But maybe, just maybe because of this, they'd walk through it a little taller. The next few weeks unfolded like an invisible current beneath the surface, swift and undeniable. Airports in Miami, Denver, and Seattle all reached out formally, requesting copies of Evelyn's audit methodology. News hadn't exploded publicly yet, but the internal chatter in federal oversight circles was ablaze. Inspectors across the country were whispering her name, not with celebrity, but with something rarer respect. Meanwhile, Terminal B at JFK had changed in subtle but visible ways. There was new signage in the screening area now, clearly outlining passenger rights. An anonymous feedback portal had been quietly installed near the exit, something Evelyn had pushed for during her last debrief. Staff rotations had become more varied, and Reynolds. His name was never spoken aloud, but his absence lingered like a cautionary tale whispered between new recruits, back in her apartment. Evelyn sat at her desk one evening, flipping through a folder marked Internal Field Report, Phase 2. Her walls were bare, except for one photo, black and white, of her mother standing outside a courtroom, 1968, hand on her hip. No fear in her eyes. It was her mother who had taught her the difference between fighting and dismantling. Don't just raise your voice, she used to say. Raise the floor they're standing on so they can't ignore the shift. That floor was shifting now. She poured herself a cup of coffee, ignoring the late hour, and kept writing. Her next report would focus not just on discriminatory screenings, but on internal retaliation, the silent punishment many whistleblowers faced when they spoke up against injustice within. If the last few months had taught her anything, it was this. Some of the most dangerous walls weren't built by systems, but by silence. A knock came at her door. It was Natalie, breathless, holding up her phone. "Evelyn, you need to see this." On the screen was a video clip, just 30 seconds, but it was already going viral. It showed Evelyn's interaction with Reynolds, caught by a traveler's phone. It had everything: his dismissive tone, the moment he rifled through her book, and the reveal when Director Halden appeared. The caption read, "They searched her for looking suspicious, but she was there to investigate them." Evelyn blinked. How? Someone posted it anonymously an hour ago. It's blowing up on TikTok, Reddit, everywhere. Comments poured in under the video. This is how you expose bias with receipts. She didn't just survive it. She documented it. Protect her at all costs. A slow, careful breath escaped Evelyn's lips. This wasn't her plan. She didn't seek viral moments. But maybe this was the moment people needed, not to glorify her, but to feel like justice could look like this: calm, methodical, uncompromising. Natalie grinned. "You okay with it?" Evelyn nodded slowly. Let it spread. The next morning, her inbox was flooded. Requests from civil rights orgs, speaking invitations, high school teachers asking if they could use the video in class, a senator's office requesting a private briefing on oversight reform. But the one message that struck her most came from an email she didn't recognize. It simply said, "My daughter is 13. She watched your video last night. and this morning, she asked me how to become an inspector. Thank you. Evelyn sat with that for a long moment. Then she opened a blank document and titled it, How to Begin a Guide for the Next Ones, because that was the real work. Not just fighting injustice, but lighting the path behind her for those who would one day step into the fire and keep walking. Justice isn't just what happens after wrong is exposed. It's what we build in its place, and that's where Evelyn Trammell was headed. Forward, always forward. A week later, Evelyn found herself standing behind a podium at a high school in Queens. The auditorium was packed rows of students in matching uniforms, teachers flanking the edges, and a few nervous parents tucked into the back. It wasn't the kind of place where federal inspectors typically made appearances. But Evelyn had said yes without hesitation, because this invitation had come from a sophomore named Jada Thompson, the same girl whose mother had emailed her. Evelyn looked out over the crowd, dozens of brown and black faces. Some bored, some curious, a few deeply attentive. She cleared her throat, adjusted the mic, and began not with stats, not with credentials, but with a story. The first time I was pulled into a secondary screening, I was 21, she said. I was wearing a suit. I had just graduated from Georgetown, and still someone looked at me and saw a threat. The room quieted, but I didn't walk away from that moment angry. I walked away with a question. How many others don't walk away at all? She told them about the airports, the audits, the agents who looked right through her until it was too late. But I'm not here today because I caught someone, she continued. I'm here because someone recorded it. Someone saw it. Someone believed that what happened to me mattered and made sure the world saw it too. She looked over at Jada, seated near the front, her notebook open and eyes wide. That means we don't need badges to hold power. We need clarity. We need courage. And most of all, we need each other. There was a silence that followed, not awkward, but reverent. Then a hand went up. A boy in the second row, small framed, glasses, nervous voice. Do you think someone like me could do what you do? Evelyn smiled. And in that moment, every heavy day of silence, every report no one read, every profile, every dismissal felt worth it. Someone like you, she said gently. You're exactly who should be doing it. The auditorium erupted in applause. After the event, Evelyn stayed longer than scheduled, answering questions, taking pictures, and handing out a few of the printed copies of her field guide. When the principal approached her, she offered something unexpected. I know you're busy, he said, but would you consider starting a mentorship program even once a month? These kids need to see someone who looks like them and stands where you stand. Evelyn hesitated for a beat, then nodded. Yes, once a month. Because the work didn't end with exposure. It didn't end with punishment. It began with planting seeds, and by that night, she had already blocked the first Saturday of every month for the rest of the year. Meanwhile, something else had started to happen. Across social media, a quiet campaign was forming, built not by Evelyn, but inspired by her. Hashtags like #YouAsho Watch the Watchers and #YouQuietJustice began trending. Stories began surfacing, stories of everyday bias caught on tape, not shouted, but shown, measured, unflinching, unapologetically true. And Evelyn, ever the quiet storm, simply watched. When she did speak, it wasn't to bask in the spotlight, it was to redirect it. In one interview, a host asked, "Don't you think it's remarkable that you brought down a corrupt officer with a single suitcase and a quiet stare?" Evelyn had smiled faintly. "No, what's remarkable is that he never imagined I had a name worth remembering." And that was the truth. Because for so long, people like her were made invisible. But now her name wasn't just remembered, it was repeated. In classrooms, in courtrooms, in airport backrooms where young trainees were being told, "You never assume." And somewhere, far from cameras and reports. Evelyn stood in front of a whiteboard, drawing a flowchart for 3 curious teenagers who had stayed after the mentorship session, explaining how a federal review worked, letting them ask everything, letting them see behind the curtain. That was the real revolution, not one moment, but 1,000 quiet ones after it. Evelyn capped her marker, turned to them, and said, "One day, someone will treat you like you don't belong in the room. That's when you remind them you built the room." And outside, the wind picked up, not a storm this time, but a steady wind of change, blowing in the right direction